All right, can everybody hear me? No? Can everybody hear me? All right. So first off, I want to thank you all for coming. Let's just make sure that we're squishing up a little bit towards the front so that everyone has room. We still have some people coming in out back. But to start us off today, we have Amelia Halstead to sing some songs with us.
Thank you. Nice work. So this last one I'm going to teach you, we're going to refrain throughout this afternoon together. This one's called Everybody's Got a Right to Live. We'll start with that first, and then of course we're going to shift to Everybody's Got a Right to Vote. So I'm going to ask you once again to repeat the lines after me. Everybody's got a right to live. Everybody's got a right to live. And before this campaign fails, we'll all go down to jail. Because everybody's got a right to live. Here's how this goes. Everybody's got a right to live. Try that. Everybody's got a right to live. Everybody's got a right to live. Everybody's got a right to live. Here's the complicated part. And before this campaign fails, we'll all go down to jail. We'll all go down to jail. Everybody's got a right to live.
For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jordan Thompson, and I'm an activist and community organizer from the Nashua area. Thank you. Now, earlier this year, I ran for state representative, and while I did not win, I was very grateful to have the endorsement and support of Rights and Democracy. So grateful that I became a member. As many of you already know, Rights and Democracy is a group that was founded in Vermont, but has branched out to this state of New Hampshire. We believe rights and democracy are one when people come together to make their voices heard. Through our work and activism, we're building a strong movement filled with people power to improve the policies that affect our communities. If you're not already a member, you'll have many opportunities to speak with RAD staff and volunteers today, and I hope you'll consider joining us. Now, our first guest speaker today is a RAD member from the Lakes region. She's a community activist and mother of two. Oh, I'm sorry, I introduced the wrong person. Okay. Well, first we're going to hear from Reverend Eric Jackson before we get on to our first speaker. So join me in welcoming Reverend Eric Jackson.
Well, good afternoon, New Hampshire. It's so good to be here with you all today, and we welcome you to Brookside Church, where I serve as the pastor here, and I also serve as president of the Greater Manchester NAACP here in the city of Manchester. So welcome. One of the things turn back the clock over the last couple years, and what we'll notice is that what we have seen is that in our last election, only roughly half of the general population, voting age population, actually turned out to vote. So what that means is that the voices of our communities are not then being heard. So to have a moment like this where we're coming together to talk about getting out to vote, I think is so important for us for such a time as this. It's not so much, we're not here today it's not so much about who you vote for or how you vote, but it's simply the fact of the matter of you going out to the polls and ensuring that everyone turns out to the polls to exercise that civic that civil right that has been given to all of us, and it's a shame that it is not exercised. And the important thing is that we must remember is that we must encourage folks to get out and vote, because that is the only way that we're going to actually be able to make meaningful change in our society. From the perspective of the Greater Manchester NAACP, many over the course of since time immemorial, as African Americans, we've been suffered through much disenfranchisement. Many died and lost their lives just so we could be able to exercise our right to vote today. And it wasn't until 1965, with the passage of the Civil Rights Voting Act, that African Americans were actually able to legally vote. 1965. And think about that, so many people that are still alive from the year 1965, so it barely has even been a generation. So this is why the NAACP believes that everyone going out to exercise their right to vote is so important, because so many people died for that right, and for people to actually go out to the polls and being able to make their voice heard. So I'm just here to welcome you and to encourage you today to go out to vote on November the 6th. Take someone with you. Bring a friend. Uber and Lyft are offering free, I believe Uber and Lyft, I was reading, are offering rides, free ride codes to actually go out to the polls and vote. With free ride shares being offered, with so many friends in the room, there is no reason why we should not have turnout at the polls on November the 6th. So we've come here today to celebrate, we've come out here to be energized, but the real work happens when we leave this place. The real work happens when we go out onto Elm Street and beyond, and we interact with our neighbors, and we interact with our friends. That's when the real work happens. You know, I remember during the last election, someone told me that they were not going out to vote because they didn't believe that voice matters. The real work for us is actually going and talking to those folks that we know are going to stay home and encourage them. Get them out to come to the polls with us. And even if there are challenges in their lives that stop them and don't allow them to actually go out to vote, to make that load lighter so they can actually make it out to the polls. Because when we leave this place, if we go out and we do this work together, and we actually get our friends, our families, our loved ones, and others out to the polls, we can make a difference and change can happen. So those are my remarks for you all today. It's simply encased in these three words: let's do this.
All right, hello again. Hopefully I don't introduce the wrong person this time. I hate to sound like a broken record, but let's make sure that we are occupying all the space that we can for the people that are still coming in. And let's make sure that we're clearing the passageways here for emergencies. Right, so our next guest speaker today is a RAD member from the Lakes region. She's a community activist and mother of two, and she's passionate about protecting public education. Join me in welcoming Nicolette Gallo-Grano.
I'm really glad to be here with you all. Some members out there of Rights and Democracy might recognize my name. I'm one of the invisible typists on the other end of RAD text outreach. We're a group that helped bring you here today with friendly, if persistent, reminders. And yes, we are real people, not robots. Our small team of mostly women volunteered ahead of the midterm primary and have been working diligently behind the scenes to remind members of important upcoming votes, and also of organizational events like the Bi-State People Power Summit, which was held in Keene. There, we were able to feed our souls on the words of progressive friends and leaders and our bellies with a potluck meal. And we were also sent some fresh Ben & Jerry's ice cream from Vermont by a special guest, which I'm sure some of you remember. That was my first big RAD event, and I thought that it was going to be pretty tough to top, but here we are. And I'm really glad that I can say the same thing when I look around this room. If you told me last year that today I'd be standing on this stage on behalf of Rights and Democracy as an opening act for our friend Bernie Sanders, I would have laughed. And I did laugh. I laughed nervously at first, and then louder every time I told somebody else. In fact, I don't know about you, but I needed that laugh. I needed a good, deep laugh, a restorative moment, and I'm holding tight to those whenever they happen. And sometimes it's gallows humor, but sometimes it's in a big room of like-minded neighbors. So today is a good day for that. Try to take a moment to soak it in. It's important that we remember what it is that we came here to protect and to maintain in our small towns and historic cities, especially when we turn on the TV or open our phones to review what's happening on social media. We've been faced with tough days and rhetoric from our government drawn from some of the darkest of human emotions. Fear and hatred breed intolerance and inspire violent acts against marginalized communities across our nation. Some of us have been directly impacted by the stories plastered across the news that for others are just part of the everyday onslaught of horror and dismay for modern America. Is this America? It is today, but will it be tomorrow? Will it be on Tuesday? That's where we come in. From on top, we're told to be afraid of caravans of migrants that are funded by a Jewish billionaire. But TV pundits really ask if there's a connection between the dog-whistled anti-Semitism of George Soros and a lone gunman opening fire in a temple to take 11 lives. It's the same churning news cycle. There is barely enough air to talk about and grieve for a mere 2 shot dead in a grocery store for the crime of shopping while black. Their assailant, having not been able to make it into another house of worship, this one predominantly African American, spread terror in that community by going to the next place he could think of where black families would be. And there he enacted violence in chasing the myth of white supremacy. And we have to do more than wring our hands. To be on one of these stages like I am today, one of so many across America, is to know that you stand next to some of those who are targeted for violence and that you may be targeted yourself. But bombs delivered to doorsteps of those who have the audacity to not comply will not change what is wrong. Closing our borders to asylum seekers, migrant workers, and working class and skilled immigrants is wrong. Making enemies of our neighbors in South and Central America is wrong. Building a wall is wrong, and it is... And it's time that we commit to building bridges in our community. One of the best bridges that I know is education. Public education is a cornerstone of the Granite States community and forms the foundation of our society. It was so important to our founding fathers that access to the best education was enshrined in our little state constitution. They understood the value of an educated community. Today, we need to recalibrate our mindset that was laid out for us. It's not just about ensuring that our own kids are well educated, but also our neighbors' kids, and the kids in the next town, and the kids across the tracks. Zip code shouldn't define opportunity. And when it does, we reaffirm generational poverty that led to busing across town lines in the Deep South. Our segregation is understood to be based mostly on income levels, but our whole state is our community. I often describe New Hampshire as one big, little, sprawling town, where I'm as likely to know someone who knows someone in Portsmouth as I am in Meredith or Manchester. It's time we educate our kids with that same mindset, with all of us in it together. A rising tide lifts all boats, and I hope on Tuesday that we'll see that wave in action. But But that will only happen if you show up. That will only happen if you continue to show up. And I'd like to thank all of you for the work that I know you have already done, because you wouldn't be here otherwise. But I need you to stay in this fight. I encourage you to join us, to sign up, to canvass, to call, to text, and not just on Tuesday. We need you in it for the long haul. Thank you so much.
So I've been told I have a little more time to teach you another song. Would you like to know another song? This one is called Somebody's Hurtin' My Brother, and it's gone on far too long. So I'm gonna sing Somebody's Hurtin' My Brother, and it's gone on, and y'all are gonna say, far too long. Somebody's hurting my brother, and it's gone on. Far too long. Somebody is hurting my brother, and it's gone on. Far too long. Amen. So here we go. It goes a little like this. Whoa, somebody's hurting my brother, and it's gone on far too long. And it's gone on far too long. And it's gone on far too long. Whoa, somebody's hurting my brother, and it's gone on far too long. And we won't be silent anymore. Try that last line with me. And we won't be silent anymore. Listen, people, somebody's hurting my sister, and it's gone on far too long. And it's gone on far too long. And it's gone on far too long. Oh, somebody's hurting my sister, and it's gone on far too long. And we won't be silent anymore. Listen, people, somebody's hurting my siblings, and it's gone on far too long. And it's gone on far too long. And it's gone on far too long. Whoa, somebody's hurting my siblings, and it's gone on far too long. And we won't be silent anymore. Come on, people, somebody's hurting our children, and it's gone on far too long. And it's gone on far too long. And it's gone on far too long. Oh, somebody's hurting our children, and it's gone on far too long. And we won't be silent anymore. That last line again. And we won't be silent anymore. One more time. And we won't be silent anymore. Nice. Well done.
Today we'll be talking a lot about the importance of young people stepping up to become leaders within their communities. Our next speaker is a young activist, current RAD board member, and prominent leader with the New Hampshire Youth Movement. Committed to environmental justice, he spent the past year facilitating climate-focused state legislative trainings. It is my pleasure to welcome Griffin Sinclair Wingate.
Hey, thank you so much for being here. Hello, everyone. My name is Griffin. I'm one of the co-founders of New Hampshire Youth Movement, and I'm just so excited to be partnering with Rights and Democracy in these events. I just came up from UNH, and we had a couple hundred students listening to the senator speak, and it was really amazing. So y'all are in for a treat. It was just about a year ago that we got together and started to create New Hampshire Youth Movement. Most of my friends and I had been a part of the fossil fuel divestment movement, and after Trump got elected, we felt like we needed to reevaluate what we were doing to create change. And during that time, a lot of conversations came up. We started talking about how politicians really weren't standing up for young people. They weren't aligned with our values. Most of them had been bought out by Wall Street or the fossil fuel industry or Big Pharma, and they were letting us drown in student debt. They weren't addressing the opioid crisis, and they weren't even talking about climate change. But at the same time, we saw that young people had an incredible amount of political power. So in 2016, Maggie Hassan won her election by just about 1,000 votes in New Hampshire. And at UNH, over 5,000 students turned out to vote for her. Those students made up her margin of victory and then some. So we set out to create a movement that would leverage the political power that young people had to elect leaders who would actually represent us and our values and create a New Hampshire that would work for all of us. But, thank you. But just days after we officially launched, a bill was introduced that threatened our whole plan. HB 372, a de facto poll tax on young people. It required anyone who wanted to vote in New Hampshire to obtain a New Hampshire's driver's license and register their car in New Hampshire. This would have effectively stopped thousands of students from being able to vote. Students really don't have the spare time to go down to the DMV for who knows how long because we're working 2 to 3 jobs to pay for our crippling student loans, which is why we don't have the money to pay fees and charges to just to be able to vote. So, a couple of friends and I, we went down to talk to Governor Shnew about this bill. And as my friend Ben was telling the governor how this bill was going to take away his right to vote, the governor cut him off and said, "I hate it. I hope it never becomes law." And we thought, wow, that was easy, cool. We just got the governor on film, like totally abandoning his party, and that video ended up getting over 4 million views later on. But it didn't take long before the governor started to backslide. So, within the following months, we worked with the New Hampshire Campaign for Voting Rights to gather thousands of petition signatures demanding that the governor keep his promise and veto that bill. We organized students from all around the state to come together in Concord and deliver those petitions while holding a sit-in in his office, sharing stories about why it's really important that young people are able to vote in New Hampshire. Ultimately, the governor signed the bill, but it doesn't go into effect until 2019, which means we have a chance this election to elect leaders who will overturn HB 372 and start creating a New Hampshire that works for all of us. That means creating an energy plan that protects the health and well-being of our community instead of the bottom line of fossil fuel companies. It means funding education in a way that sets students up for success instead of indebting them to big banks. And it means a tax system that ensures the wealthiest people and corporations pay their fair share so we can start to address the massive disparity between wealth and income in this country. And that barely scratches the surface. We need strong government action to protect the common good. Now, I know that every one of you here is in this fight with me. And every one of you here are going to go to the polls and vote on Tuesday and bring all your friends with you, right? Thank you. So I'm going to follow in the suit of people who've been up here before me and ask you to keep fighting after Election Day. We need to hold the people that we elect accountable. We need to pass landmark progressive legislation in New Hampshire this spring. And we need to talk to every presidential candidate who comes to New Hampshire to let them know what our values are and let them know they need to have those values too if they want our vote. It's a real honor to be here today, and it's pretty surreal to be speaking in front of so many people and speaking before Senator Bernie Sanders. So thank you so much. Let's keep voting, let's keep fighting, let's keep winning, and let's make New Hampshire a place where everyone can thrive. Thank you.
Whoa, somebody's hurting our water, and it's gone on far too long, and it's gone on far too long, and it's gone on far too long. Whoa, somebody's hurting our water, and it's gone on far too long, and we won't be silent anymore. Listen, people, somebody's hurting our planet, and it's gone on far too long, and it's gone on far too long. Yes, it's gone on far too long. Oh, somebody's hurting our planet, and it's gone on far too long, and we won't be silent anymore. And we won't be silent anymore. And we won't be silent anymore. We are a new, unsettling force, and we are powerful, a new, unsettling force, and we're here, a new, unsettling force for liberation, and we've got nothing to lose but our chains, and we've got nothing to lose but our chains. We are a new, unsettling force, and we are powerful, a new, unsettling force, and we're here, a new, unsettling force for liberation, and we've got nothing to lose but our chains, and we've got nothing to lose but our chains, and we've got nothing to lose but our chains. And just in case you forgot, everybody's got a right to vote. Everybody's got a right to vote. And before this campaign fails, we'll all go down to jail. 'Cause everybody's got a right to vote. Oh yeah, everybody's got a right to vote. Everybody's got a right to vote. And before this campaign fails, we'll all go down to jail. 'Cause everybody's got a right to vote. Nicely done.
All right, I'm feeling inspired. How about y'all? All right. So we're 2 days out from midterms, and I bet some of you are still wondering, what can I do to help? Well, first off, you can start by canvassing. Door-to-door knocking is the most effective, valuable tool in raising awareness for a campaign or a candidate. There's nothing quite like talking face-to-face with a voter and discussing the issues affecting them and their family. Today, everyone will have the opportunity to canvass outside of this church. We're so grateful to have volunteers from the Granite State Organizing Project and Win Together to hand out packets and help mobilize. If you're unable to canvass, however, we are also using the Hustle app to notify voters of their polling locations and candidates in their wards and districts. Hustle is a super useful texting app, and for those of you sticking around the event, we'll be able to set you up in the gallery. We're also hosting Hustle volunteers in our Manchester office from 3 to 7 tomorrow at 83 Hanover Street, that's Suite 26. And if you want, you can go right up to the gallery above, and when this is over, we'll be using Hustle to contact voters until about 6 this evening. Lastly, and perhaps most importantly, I have to stress the importance of you getting out to vote on Tuesday. Make sure that you have a plan in place to vote. Make sure that you know what your polling location is and what time it'll be open. The first polls open at 6 a.m., and I hope to see you all there. Bring a friend, bring a family member, bring a neighbor. It's so important that we show our strength in numbers on Election Day. While voting is one of the most important ways to be civically engaged, it's not the only way. We encourage and invite voters to remain active even after the midterms. With Rights and Democracy, you'll have the opportunity to take part in issue-based campaigns during the legislative session, raising awareness about issues like Medicare for all, paid family medical leave, and a higher minimum wage. Stay active, stay involved. So we're running a little bit ahead of schedule, so we're going to have the Executive Director of Rights and Democracy, James, come up and say a few words to you.
Good afternoon. It's great to be here with all of you. Like Griffin and Abby, we just came from a huge rally also in Durham at UNH with folks from Rights and Democracy and New Hampshire Youth Movement and from a variety of organizations building this movement. So it's great to get here and see this beautiful church filled with so many beautiful people. So thanks so much for coming out. We know it's busy season. There's a lot of folks out there canvassing, knocking on doors, and talking to people about getting out to vote. We're going to keep doing that. Special thanks to everyone at Brookside for hosting this event. I think that this movement that we're building is really, truly, a movement of values. What kind of values do we want to be reflected in public policy? Many people have said over the years that the state budget and the federal budget really is, in many ways, one of the most important moral documents in our community, in our society. The priorities that we set for public policy are the priorities that we have. And I think a lot of us would agree that we have a lot of work to do to have the priorities that are set with public policy truly reflect our values as neighbors, as community people, that we're making sure that everyone has a home, that everyone has a chance to have the health care that they need, that no one is living in poverty, that we all have access to clean water. And that as a father of 2 young kids, I think constantly about what public policies are allowing to be done right now to our ecological systems. The ability for this beautiful, amazing planet to be able to produce these gorgeous days and produce life is ultimately threatened by public policy that we allow for no good reason other than the profits for some very large, incredibly profitable, very wealthy people. We are destroying our oceans, we're destroying our ability to produce life, and I think all of us realize that that's not in alignment with our values, is it? So we call ourselves Rights and Democracy for a reason. We think very much that rights are an opportunity to be able to secure our values into public policy. So our right to health care is something that we really believe is deeply connected to the values in our communities. But the reason why we have to make them rights is because they don't happen, by accident. Right now, people would say we don't have the right to health care because there's tens of millions of people in this country that don't have health insurance. You know, richest country in the history of the world, and we have people that are going without health care services that they need just because they can't afford it. It's a leading reason why people fall into homelessness. They get sick, don't have the income, don't have the money, and can't pay their rent. You know, this is the wealthiest country that the world has ever seen, and yet you can go into a homeless shelter, any town in New Hampshire, and you'll find people who've been working full-time jobs but fell through the cracks because we don't have public policy that absolutely recognizes the values that we hold in our community. We realize that, you know, our rights are something that nobody gives us. You know, they are only things that we can get by coming together and demanding them and winning them. You know, right? We have, you know, many good things that are about this country. You know, we've won many things in the past. You know, some have called it, you know, the New Deal was in some ways a social contract, where we were able to secure a dignified retirement with Social Security, and we were able to have elements of universal health care with Medicare, eventually Medicaid. You know, we were able to put in basic standards around having a minimum wage and trying to make it so that the minimum wage was actually a livable wage. But unfortunately, there's been attack on that social contract. We don't have, you know, that many of those values that we had at the time, you know, currently have been very much jeopardized. Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security, all of those things that we have in public policy have been threatened and have been whittled away at. And so, you know, we have our work cut out for us for this generation. And, you know, Rights Democracy, we are talking to folks around the country about the need to secure a new social contract that absolutely recognizes the basic rights of our communities and the needs of our communities. And one that absolutely now, in this generation, has to think about our relationship with the planet. How can we have an economy that actually functions in harmony with our planet instead of really jeopardizing the ability for future generations to be able to have a livable planet and for other life on this planet to be also able to live and thrive. So we have our work cut out for us. One of the things that's been very special about today for us in the work for Rights and Democracy is the fact that we've been working with the New Hampshire Youth Movement. You know, at UNH, we had this kind of crowd, but mainly, you know, people in their late teens, early 20s. And it was really, for me, as someone who, you know, who's had the honor and the privilege to be able to organize in communities to try to create change, it feels incredibly important now more than ever that we're able to lift up the next generation of leaders. Because the decisions that get made right now are impacting not only our communities right now, but ultimately they're having a huge impact on future generations. And as I said, as a father, you know, there's not a day that goes by when I don't think about what the world is going to be like when my kids grow up to be adults. And it's, you know, our generation right now, I feel, you know, this to the bottom of my soul that it is up to us to be able to pass the torch on to the next generation and give them a chance to have this world be something that we can all really be proud of. And so New Hampshire Youth Movement is a new organization. It's growing across the state, and Rights and Democracy is incredibly excited to continue to work with folks in it and to get it going, not only all over New Hampshire, but we've been talking and excited. Folks in Vermont are saying, wait, we need a youth movement too. So it's been very exciting. So please, just another round of applause for all the hard work of New Hampshire Youth Movement. So Rights and Democracy, as an organization, many of you know this, but since we have the time where we're waiting for the center, I'll give you a little bit of a background story. In 2015, a bunch of folks were talking about, what was happening, what was going on in this country and in our communities, and what was the direction that, we needed to go in. I came out of the labor movement and the universal health care movement. I'd worked on an effort for healthcare as a human right starting in about 2008. And just seeing, the amazing amount of support there is for those kind of policies, and yet the inability to actually have the United States become the last industrialized country in the developed world to have a universal health care system. There's been so many chapters of pushing for it in this country, and it hasn't happened. And so a lot of us got together and we were talking about, well, what would it take? And so that was what brought us to the conversation of building Rights and Democracy. And some of that conversation started in Vermont, but very quickly came to New Hampshire. And it was interesting because, as we were, talking about, building Rights and Democracy, Senator Sanders back in 2016 was, building, launching his campaign for president back then. And he talked about this idea of the need for a political revolution. And that was not the words that we were talking about when we were talking about building Rights and Democracy. But it very much captured the spirit of what people were coming together. This notion that, elections are important, but democracy is much bigger than elections. Democracy and the need for a political revolution to get us to an actual democracy is actually, something that happens on election day, but really goes all the year round. And so we started talking about what would it take to build an organization that could help impact, outcomes, getting people to go out to vote, but also to develop the capacity in our communities to work together all year round to be able to push on different issues. And in our states, there's a lot of great work that gets done by grassroots organizations. New Hampshire has some dynamo, organizations that are either organizing very deeply in specific communities or deeply on specific issues. And one of the things that we realized, for Rights and Democracy is that a lot of these issues are very deeply interconnected. You can't win the right to health care in a situation where people are living in poverty. The right to health is part of, the right to be able to live healthy lives. And if you talk to people who work in public health, they talk about something called the social determinants of health. Whereas, if you look at what people can be healthy, what makes healthy communities, the social determinants are a huge part. So you could have the best healthcare system in the world, but if you have people living in housing that is not healthy, don't have housing, poverty, can't get access to healthy food, can't afford it, water, as everyone knows, there's issues in water across our communities and across this country with lead and other toxins that we've let get into the water systems. So what good is a good healthcare system if those things are poisoning our children and poisoning our communities? So we realized that this rights movement needs to be comprehensive because the things that we're struggling with are interconnected. And so our movements must be interconnected. Yeah. All right, with that, I have been told that Senator Sanders is here, so please, I'll give it back to Jordan. Thank you, everyone.
All right. Okay, so our final speaker today has changed the narrative surrounding so many of the issues that we face as a nation. He spent his entire career as a devoted public servant, fighting for all of us, not just those at the top. His 2016 campaign for the Democratic nomination energized young people across this country, and we continue to be inspired by his progressive vision today. We are so grateful to have him here with us. Please join me in giving a warm and friendly welcome to Senator Bernie Sanders.
Thank you, Manchester. Thank you. Thank you very much. Oh, thank you. This is a wonderful turnout, and I appreciate everybody being here. And let me thank the Reverend Jackson and Reverend Halstead and Jordan Thompson and Nicolette Garlick-Grano and Griffin Sinclair and Jordan Thompson for all of their help in putting together this event today. And let me also thank Rights and Democracy. Rights and Democracy is doing a great job in undertaking the most important task that we face as a nation, and that is getting people involved at the grassroots level in the political process. So thank you, Rights and Democracy. Let me begin by reminding folks that 4 years ago, the American people, for whatever reason, turned their backs on politics. And we had a midterm election, and guess what? Nobody came out to vote. We had in Vermont and around this country the lowest voter turnout since World War II, when soldiers were abroad. All right? Working people didn't vote, lower income people didn't vote, people of color didn't vote, and in terrible numbers, young people did not go to the polls. So we had a situation where almost 2 out of 3 Americans didn't vote. And guess what happened? We ended up with right-wing extremist leadership in the U.S. House, the U.S. Senate, and in governor's chairs all across our country. When people don't vote and when billionaires buy elections, bad things happen. Now, in the last 2 weeks, I have been to 13 states, been to 35 meetings, some large rallies, some smaller town meetings. I think the American people are beginning to wake up, and I think this time, we're not going to have the lowest voter turnout in modern history. We're going to have the highest voter turnout. And my plea to all of you, as we're coming down to the last few days of this election, not only am I begging you to come out to vote, I am urging you to bring your friends and your family and your coworkers. Because this election, without exaggeration, is the most important midterm election in the modern history of the United States of America. Let me just start off by telling you what happens when we elect right-wing leadership in the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate. Their first goal, and they came within one vote of accomplishing it, was to throw 32 million Americans off of the health care they currently have. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine people today in New Hampshire and Vermont, all across this country, dealing with cancer, dealing with heart disease, dealing with diabetes, whose lifeline is an insurance program that these guys came within one vote? That vote was from the late Senator John McCain. They came within one vote of throwing millions of people off of the health care that they needed. Well, they were not successful in that effort. They were not successful then in doing away with the protections that the Affordable Care Act has for people with pre-existing conditions. Now, you know what that's all about? What that's about is that people who have serious problems before the Affordable Care Act, they go to the insurance company and they look for an insurance policy, and the insurance company would say, well, tell me, have you ever had breast cancer? Have you ever had diabetes? And they say, yeah, we did. Well, we can't quite cover you for those illnesses, or we're going to charge you an outrageous price for the insurance that you need. How obscene is it for insurance companies to be rejecting people who desperately need the coverage? Well, we dealt with that issue, and we made discrimination against people with pre-existing conditions illegal. But right now, there is a case winding its way to the Supreme Court which would rule the Affordable Care Act unconstitutional, a case being brought by Republican attorneys general all over this country. And we have got to do everything we can, and this election is all about that. It's to make it very clear that in America, if you have a serious illness, yes, without discrimination, you're going to get the insurance coverage that you are entitled to. But then, after having failed at repealing the Affordable Care Act, they came back with a so-called tax reform plan. In our country today, we have more wealth and income inequality than any major country on earth. It is worse today than at any time since the 1920s. Now, you don't hear a whole lot of folks talking about that issue. It's too sensitive an issue. It might offend people who have money, and it might expose the unfairness of our current economy. But I do talk about it. And I think that there's something wrong when in America today, you got 3 people who own more wealth than the bottom half of the American people. 3 people own more wealth than the bottom 160 million people. You got the top 1/10 of 1% owning more wealth than the bottom 90%. While people in New Hampshire and in Vermont work 2 or 3 jobs to keep their families intact and to put food on the table, 40% of all new income goes to the top 1%. And what was the Republican congressional response to this grotesque level of income and wealth inequality? It was to give massive tax breaks to the top 1%. Now, when Trump ran for president, he said that our tax reform program will not benefit the wealthy. I know that I will shock everybody here in this room to tell you he wasn't telling the truth. I will not use another word here. We're in a house of God. Let's just keep it at that. He was not telling the truth. And in fact, 83% of all of the benefits of that tax reform bill went to the people who need it the least, the top 1%. That is wrong. And then a few months after that, Trump came back and he said, it's not enough that I gave $1 trillion in tax breaks to the top 1%. Now what I got to do to control the deficit, I got to cut Medicare by $500 billion, Medicaid by $1 trillion, Social Security Disability Fund by $72 billion over a 10-year period. And then on top of that, they passed the largest military budget in history, such that we are now spending more than the next 10 countries combined. So that's what the Republican policy is about. Massive tax breaks to the rich, cuts not only in Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, but in education, in nutrition programs. Some of you may be aware of a program called the WIC program. You aware of that? It's a program, a very wonderful program, that provides nutrition for low-income pregnant women so that that pregnancy is a healthy one, and when the baby is born, that baby gets good nutrition as well. Massive cuts to the WIC program. What we are saying and what this election is about is we are not about giving tax breaks to billionaires and cutting nutrition programs for babies. Now, you might ask yourself a question, and it's a pretty simple question. How does it happen when the American people want one thing, you got a Congress that does literally exactly the opposite thing? All right? The American people, as it happens, believe that health care is a right, not a privilege. And the reason Donald Trump is busy attacking me and those of us who stand for Medicare for all, he reads the same polls that I do. 70% of the American people now support Medicare for all. But why is it that when the people want one thing, the Republican leadership in Congress is doing literally exactly the opposite? The American people, time after time, poll after poll, have made it clear that when the rich are getting much richer while the middle class is struggling, the demand is that the wealthy and large corporations start paying their fair share of taxes, not get huge tax breaks. So why is it? Why is it? And I'll tell you the answer. And this is the most important political issue that we have got to deal with. Why it is that elected officials, time and time again, do the exact opposite of what the American people want. And that is that we have a corrupt campaign finance system that allows billionaires to buy elections. Go to downtown Manchester and stand on a corner and ask people, do you think we should give massive tax breaks to billionaires and then cut Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid and education? People will laugh at you. They say, you're out of your mind. Why would anybody think about that? But that is the agenda of the Republican Party. Why is that? Because they are beholden not to their constituents, not to ordinary Americans, not to the people who are working 2 or 3 jobs, not to the people who don't have any health insurance. They are beholden to billionaires who right now, at this moment, are pouring hundreds of millions of dollars into campaigns in ugly 30-second TV ads. And our demand must be, and we got to keep our eyes focused on this, because this issue relates to everything else. We have got to overturn this disastrous Citizens United Supreme Court decision. We have got to move toward public funding of elections. And what that means, it should not only be wealthy people or candidates beholden to wealthy people running for office. I know it sounds like a radical and crazy idea, but what about middle class and working class people actually being able to run for office and win elections? And by the way, when we talk about election reform, we have got to stand up as firmly as we can and fight back against this ugly, racist voter suppression which is taking place all over this country. And this really galls me, and I'll tell you why. I have run for office many times in Vermont. Sometimes I've lost, and sometimes I've won. Fortunately, most times I've won. But I've lost, okay? But it has never occurred to me, and I think the vast majority of candidates, to try to figure out a way as to how we can deny people the right to vote who might vote against me, all right? If I can't win an election on my ideas, I don't want to win that election. But all over this country, you're seeing candidates working hard to make it harder for people to vote because those people might be voting against it. We're seeing it in Georgia today, seeing it in North Dakota, we're seeing it all over this country. And I say to those politicians who want to suppress the vote, if you don't have the guts to run in an open, free, and fair election, get out of politics and get a new job. Now, the bad news is, as I've indicated, we have a Congress and a president way out of touch with where the American people are. We have a campaign finance system which is corrupt. We have weird gerrymandering all over this country. That's the bad news. Let me give you some good news. And the good news is that on issue after issue, the American people are beginning to demand that the government of the United States start representing all of the people, not just wealthy campaign contributors. Three years ago, when I was in New Hampshire and I was all over the state campaigning for president, when I talked about Medicare for all, the opposition was saying, oh, it's a radical idea, it's an extreme idea, it's not what the American people want. That has changed profoundly over the last 3 years. Three years ago, we said that in America, in New Hampshire and Vermont, people should not be forced to work for starvation wages. You can't raise a family on $9 an hour, on $10 an hour. And we made it clear that the minimum wage has got to be a living wage, $15 an hour. And all across this country now, minimum wage is moving up to $15 an hour. Got 30 co-sponsors on my bill in the Senate. Recently, we got Amazon, owned by the wealthiest person in the world, to raise their wages to $15 an hour. Three years ago, in New Hampshire and around the country, some of us were saying that in modern American times, a high school degree is not enough if you're going to go out and get the good-paying jobs that are available. That we need to rethink what public education is about. When I was a kid, you graduated high school, you could go out and get a decent job and make decent wages. That world has changed. And that is why we must make public colleges and universities tuition-free. There are over 40 million Americans today, including, I suspect, people in this room, who are dealing with outrageous levels of student debt. I remember being in New Hampshire and talking to a woman. She says, Bernie, I'm not only paying off, this is a mother, I'm not only paying off my student debt, now I'm paying off my kids' student debt. People should not be punished for the crime of getting a decent education. We got to lower that debt. And when people say, well, Bernie, that's a nice idea, how are you going to afford it? Well, I would suggest that making higher education, public colleges and universities, tuition-free and lowering student debt is a heck of a lot better investment than $1 trillion tax break for the 1%. And when we talk about education, I beg of you to remember, never forget, you are not living in a poor country. You are living in the wealthiest country in the history of the world. I was in Colorado 2 weeks ago, and I learned something I didn't know. Colorado, over half the school districts in Colorado, the kids are going to school 4 days a week, because they don't have the budget for a 5-day week. Similar in Oklahoma. We have child care situation in Vermont, I suspect in New Hampshire, which is unconscionable, where working families cannot find quality, affordable child care. We have the highest rate of childhood poverty of any major country on earth. It is time we got our priorities right. We don't need the largest military budget in the history of the world. We don't need a tax system which allows major profitable corporations to avoid paying any taxes at all because they're stashing their money in the Cayman Islands and other tax havens. Let us get our priorities right and understand that the future of our country is with the children. Let us invest in the children. Now, Donald Trump tells a lot of, again, I don't want to use a certain four-letter word here. Let's just say he doesn't know the difference between truth and falsehood. How's that? And maybe he has a pathological problem in that regard. But a couple of weeks ago, he told a whopper that was not only relevant to our country, but to the entire world. He was asked on a TV program, well, what do you think about climate change? And he said, well, you know, people really don't know what's going on. We're not sure what's happening. Not quite, Mr. President. In fact, the evidence is now very clear, and the scientific community is virtually united. Climate change is real. Climate change is caused by human activity. Climate change is already causing very devastating problems in our country and around the world. And some of you may have read, I don't know how much media it got, it certainly deserved more. You may have seen a recent report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Any of you see that? And what they said should scare the bejesus out of everybody, not only in this country, but around the world. And what they said, basically, is that the situation is worse than we had anticipated, that we have a window of opportunity of 12 years, not a long period of time, to substantially reduce carbon emissions, or else the planet we are going to leave our kids and grandchildren will be irreparably harmed. 12 years. And we have a president who not only does not believe in the reality of climate change, he is working hand in glove with the fossil fuel industry to squeeze out as much profit as they can as they help to destroy this planet. And that is unforgivable. And our job as custodians of this planet, as people who love our kids and our grandchildren and want them to have good and healthy lives, we together have got to stand up to the greed of the fossil fuel industry, transform our energy system away from fossil fuel and into energy efficiency and sustainable energy, and we can do it. And there is another issue. There is, thank you. It's an exuberant crowd we have here today. All right. And there is another issue where we're gaining some traction. We're beginning to make some progress. We've got a long way to go. And that is the understanding that our current criminal justice system is not only broken, but it is racist. We have got to ask ourselves a pretty simple question. How does it happen that in America today we have more people in jail than any other country on earth? China is, I think, 4 times our size. It's an authoritarian communist country. We have more people in jail than China does, disproportionately African American, Latino, and Native American. We have got to ask ourselves, and a lot of people don't know this, why it is that in America today, as we speak, 400,000 people are behind bars for the crime of being poor. They cannot afford bail after they were arrested. Now, many of us thought that debtors' prisons were just for the times of Charles Dickens. That is not the case. We have debtors' prison in America. We have people in jail today because they cannot afford $500 or $1,000 to get a bail. That is outrageous, and we have got to end that policy. And the other policy we are making really significant progress in, and the last couple of years we made some giant steps forward, is that when we talk about criminal justice, we must understand that the so-called war on drugs has been a disaster for millions of people. Over the years, millions of Americans have received police records for the crime of possessing marijuana. Today in Washington, we still have a federal Controlled Substance Act which equates heroin, a killer drug, with marijuana. What is happening in America, it's happening in Vermont, and it is happening all over this country, is that state governments understand that we must decriminalize and legalize the possession of marijuana. And again, on all of these issues, it's not just Bernie Sanders, it's not just you. This is what the American people want. And I'll tell you another issue, where despite Trump's demonizing of Latinos and immigrants, despite that, 80% of the American people in the last poll that I saw understand that we have got to provide legal protection to the 1.8 million young people in this country who are in the DACA program or eligible for the DACA program. Eighty percent of the American people believe in that, and a strong majority of people understand that when you have 10 million undocumented people in this country, our job is to pass comprehensive immigration reform and a path toward citizenship for those people. And I'll tell you where else there is strong support, even in rural states like New Hampshire and Vermont, and that is common sense gun safety legislation. That means an expansion and improvement in background checks. It means doing away with the so-called gun show loophole. It means doing away with this straw man provision which allows somebody legally to buy guns and then sell them to criminals and gangs. It means, in my view, and the country is split on this, in my view, it means doing away with the sale and distribution of assault weapons in America. And again, this is what the American people want. This is what gun owners want. This is what non-gun owners want. And there is another issue out there where there is widespread support. The point that I'm making here is that the issues that I'm talking about, these are not fringe issues. These are issues that the vast majority of the American people support, and Congress is moving in very much the opposite way. One other issue out there. While the Republican leadership in Washington is trying to defund Planned Parenthood, while governors all over this country are trying to make it harder for a woman to control her own body, 70% of the American people oppose repealing Roe versus Wade. I understand that in New Hampshire and in Vermont, all across this country, there are honest, sincere people who have differences of opinion on the issue. But this is what has always kind of amazed me. We have Republicans running for office all across this country, and they say, we believe in small government. We believe in getting the government off the backs of the people. Well, if you believe that, don't have the state or federal government tell every woman in America what she could do with her body. Now, it goes without saying that Mr. Trump and I disagree on economic issues, healthcare issues, environmental issues, women's issues, immigration, you name it. But I want to tell you something that goes even deeper in this election than all of those issues. When somebody becomes president of the United States from an historical perspective, whether they have been conservative or liberal, they have understood one very important thing about what a president of the United States is supposed to do. And that is that in a very diverse nation, where in this room there are people who come, families come from God knows every country on earth, that in a very diverse nation where we have people of different colors, different backgrounds, the function of the President of the United States is to bring us together, not divide us up. And today, in an unprecedented way, we have a president who is trying to gain votes by having one group of people attack another group of people, by demonizing immigrants, by suggesting before he became president that Barack Obama, our first African-American president, was not born in the United States of America, by trying to impose a ban on Muslims coming into this country, by attacking the transgender community. What he is doing is trying to get people in America to hate each other, to pit one group against another. I don't have to explain to anybody in this church today that throughout the history of this country, a country that we love and are very proud of, and has done such extraordinary things, that like every other country on earth, we have had serious problems. We know what happened when the first settlers came to America and what they did to the Native Americans. We know that. We know the abomination of slavery and segregation and racism. We know that 100 years ago in America, women did not have the right to vote. They did not have the right to get a higher education. They did not have the right to go out and get the jobs that they wanted. We know that our brothers and sisters in the gay community were forced to suppress their sexuality. We know of all of the discrimination that has taken place against Asians, against French Canadians and Catholics in our part of the world, against Italians, Irish, and Jews. We know all of that discrimination and the pain that it caused so many people. But we also know something else, that from the very beginning of this country, extraordinarily brave people who put their lives on the line and sometimes died, sometimes were beaten, sometimes were lynched, they said that discrimination is wrong, that we are a common humanity, that we share the same vision, the same hopes for our children, that we have got to come together. So today, at a time when we have a president trying to divide us up, we say to this president that whether we are black or whites or Latino or Asian or Native American, whether we are male or female, whether we are gay or straight, we understand that the future of this country is coming together, and Trump and nobody is going to divide us up. Thank you. So this election on Tuesday is not just about the very important issues of healthcare, education, climate change, women's rights, and all those other very important issues. It is something even deeper than that. It is about who we are as Americans and what kind of country we want to leave our children. So I hope very much that on Tuesday all of you will come out to vote. I hope that you will bring as many people as you can with you. Now is the time to change the direction of this country. Now is the time to end one-party rule in Washington. Let's go out, let's do it. Thank you all very much.